Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Amandana. I'm Amanda,
And I'm Mandana.
and today we have a very special guest. But before we introduce her, I would like to give you a little bit of context for this episode. Basically, a few days ago, I was scrolling away on TikTok and I came across a video of a girl who met a man, an Italian man, during her trip to Italy. And then obviously, a lot of people had things to say about that. Everyone had an opinion about it, ranging from, girl, you better go back and marry this man, to, this is something they do to tourists, stay safe.
And then we saw our guest, Talia, who had commented under the post and had something similar that had happened to her.
Yes, welcome, Talia. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Talia, first, please tell us a little bit about your trip. Where did you go specifically and why you chose to take that trip, as well as where you're originally from and how old were you when all of this happened?
Yeah, so the trip happened back in 2018. I was 24 years old at the time. I was living in Seattle, which is where I'm from, Seattle, Washington. And at the time, I was working for a glass artist. And the glass artist was from Italy. And so every year there's this Glass Art Society conference, and it's held in a different location around the world each year. That year it was in Venice, Italy. And so I ended up going to Italy on a 2-week work trip.
Wow, okay. So we were wondering, can you please share every little detail from your story with meeting a man abroad and how did it impact you? And are you still with him?
Yeah, so I had spent like half of my trip just obviously enjoying Venice.
Mm.
There's so much to see, so much to do, and I was having a great time. I was in a situationship at the time with a not so great guy. And I don't even remember. We got into this little argument one of the nights there, and I just thought, I am young. This is so silly. I'm in Italy. Like, it's beautiful. There's so many people to meet. What am I doing? Like, letting this guy get me upset. So I downloaded Tinder,
Okay.
a Tinder profile. I spent like 30 minutes swiping every which way. And then I went and got ready. Came back to my phone, evaluated the options. And there was this gentleman named Lorenzo who was super funny. He seemed really relatable and personal. I ended up going out on a date with him, and it was like the best first date you could possibly imagine. We were in San Marco Square, which is a beautiful plaza in Venice. It was nighttime. There was live bands. There was music and dancing. Like, how do you not fall in love in that kind of setting, right? So I thought to myself, I just had like the best night ever. This is great. That was a fun story for the books. He ended up reaching out the next day. We went on a second date, and then a third on the third date. And at that point, he had to go back to Rome. He was covering for a coworker in the Venice office of where he was working at the time. So we walked to the train station and had a hug goodbye. And it was like, I have no idea if I'm ever going to see this man again. Uh, I don't know what happened. I cried. He was like not trying to get emotional, but I think he definitely was a little bit. Just because, obviously we live so far apart. But I can say that in March we celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary.
Wow,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Thank you.
And so long distance relationships can definitely be challenging. How did you manage that once you returned home? And how did it affect your day-to-day life?
Yeah, it's really hard, especially when you have such a time difference. Me being on the West Coast, I was 9 hours behind him. So even just communicating was hard. And then, of course, there was a language barrier as well, which is just made even more difficult when you're communicating on text. But, we both felt strongly that there was something there. So 3 months later, he ended up flying out to Seattle, and met my family and was here for a week. And that week for us was kind of like a test, like, okay,
Mhm.
is there something here outside of all the romance and like, lore of Italy? Like, can this relationship survive outside of that? And that trip definitely confirmed it for us. So then it was just trying to figure out logistically how we could make a relationship work.
Mhm. And I now have a bit of a difficult question to answer. And maybe our listeners can also comment their thoughts on this subject under our Instagram video for this episode at Amandana Podcast. But basically, my question is, why do you think girls fantasize about meeting someone abroad?
Yeah, I think, especially if you didn't grow up in a big city. I kind of grew up in the suburbs of Seattle, so it's a smaller town. You know a lot of the people.
Mhm.
I think it's exciting to get outside of your comfort zone, to, meet people from different cultures. There's so much more to experience, and it kind of just opens up your perspective on a lot of things. But outside of that, he couldn't just move to the US and I couldn't just move to Italy without visas. So you have to
Mhm.
navigate that whole conversation. We ended up moving to Spain, which is a whole different conversation. And we lived in Barcelona. So that was kind of how we moved forward in the relationship. But yeah, I think there's a lot to romanticize and it is fun. And I definitely encourage it because I've always held the belief that, what are the odds that my soulmate, if you will, or the person that I'm supposed to be with lives, within a 30-minute radius of me? Statistically, I feel like that's a tough one to to accept. So I'm all for,
Mhm.
broadening your horizons. But it is tricky to manage.
Indeed, love can be found in the most unexpected places and at the most unexpected times, which brings me to my next question. The world of dating can be really tough, and I was wondering, do you have any tips you can give based on your experience to our listeners? Since I often hear people getting discouraged with this cycle of repetitive, short-lived connections that we have nowadays.
Yeah, that's tricky because I feel like it's all, I think the most important part is it starts with yourself and where you're at. Um, if you're really ready for a relationship at that point in time, like I do think that there's a certain aspect where you have to be comfortable with who you are, and you have to really love who you are as a person before you can accept love from someone else. Otherwise, sometimes you might find yourself looking for validation or happiness in others, where certainly you want your partner to bring joy into your life, to make you happy, but you don't want to be dependent on that. And I think some of those short-term relationships come out of that cycle of like constantly chasing that validation or not getting what you need, like having those
Mhm.
needs fulfilled. So the more confident and sure you can be of yourself, I think the better off you are to find yourself in a relationship where you can get some longevity out of it.
Also, I got the chance to view a few of your TikToks, and one of them particularly caught my attention. It was about the shift in confidence now that you are 30, and I was wondering, can you share a little bit about this and provide a few tips as well for our listeners?
Yeah, it's definitely easier to say than it is to do. I think when you're giving tips about being self-confident, um, I think some of it is just time, which there's not much you can do about that. I think that at least for me personally, when I was younger, I was a lot more concerned with how other people were viewing me, what they were thinking about me, just their opinions of me. And that noise kind of starts to quiet. I found the older I get. Um, and really, I feel like once you can quiet that out, you'll find that, most people I think are pretty happy with who they are. And you can be more secure in your decisions and your choices, even in your appearance. I am getting older, but I feel like I love myself more now. And I look back at to when I was in high school and I weighed less, I was more in shape. Conventionally, I was, prettier from, what our society views as like the norms for an attractive woman. Um, but I was so hard on myself. I remember being 16 years old and looking in the mirror, and 18 and even at 21, and just being like, oh, I wish I could change this. I wish I could change that. And, it's just so easy to be your own worst critic. But if you can find a way to just change that inner dialogue that you have with yourself to be more positive, be kinder to yourself, you'll find that you have a lot more grace and forgiveness.
Yeah, I definitely think with age comes like wisdom and just more an acceptance of yourself, and that definitely helps with confidence. I also had a question regarding, well, your now husband. Do you
Yeah.
think there is a cultural difference between, for instance, like the men in the US and the men in
Mm.
like, Europe and Italy? Like, are they more, they're more, I don't want to say emotional, but like romantic, comfortable with
Mhm.
expressing their feelings, maybe they're more like chivalrous or anything like that.
Yeah, I definitely think that can be true. Of course, I'm having a very singular experience with one man. So I can't speak to like the whole population, but I do think that that is true. There's some pros and cons to it. I think that, my husband's half Italian, half Venezuelan.
Mhm.
And so I think it's true in both cultures that um, they can be a lot more traditional, and there's pros and cons to that. Um, the pros being that, they can be more romantic. My husband definitely has the mindset that he wants to take care of me, provide for me, protect me, all that sort of things that is very like fairy tale-esque, and it's romantic. But then, my husband's very open, and he's super supportive. I work full time. I'm a career mom. So we have like a pretty modern relationship, but I do know that there also is some, you know, maybe different expectations when it comes to the household and things like that. So I think there's pros and cons, and that's why it's just so important to get to know the person, their family, their values.
Mhm.
But it's definitely more so a culture of, getting caught up in the moment and embracing the romance.
Mhm.
And I was wondering, how long did it take you guys before you moved in together? Did everything happen quickly, or did you?
Yeah, it happened really quick. So we did long distance from when we met for about 6 months. And then it got
Mhm.
really difficult. And we were like, okay, like we're either in or we're out.
Mhm.
And that's when we decided to move to Spain. So I sold my house, I quit
Oh.
my job. Like I was just at a point in my life where I was open to saying yes to any adventure that came my way. So again, like timing was right for me.
Mhm.
And yeah, we were living in Spain, and then I became pregnant with our first child, who we ended up naming Venice.
Mhm.
Oh,
Aw.
it's so
That's so
cute.
cute. It seems like straight out of a movie. And how was the move to Spain? Was it difficult? Because it's a pretty big move.
Yeah, it was tough. I brought my dog with me. So there was just like a lot of logistics in getting I ended up getting a student visa, which I think is
Mhm.
like the best hack if you find yourself in this situation. It's an affordable way to do it, relatively speaking. And I also had the bonus of being enrolled in language classes. So I was just at a school to learn Spanish. So I was doing that part time. And then also the student visa gave me ability to have a working visa, which was really convenient. So I definitely recommend that. But it's quite the process, going through everything. And then on the reverse, when my husband and I eventually moved back to the States, it was a lot.
Yeah,
Well, I think that was it. Do you have any more questions, Amanda?
I'm good if you're good.
So, thank you so much, Talia, for taking the time to share your story with us. And Thank you to our listeners for your constant support. Please don't forget to rate this episode a 5-star and leave us a review.
And please join us next time for more stories. Again, I'm Amanda.
And I'm Mandana, and we will see you all on our next episode. Bye.